Welcome to the Jefferson County Teacher Keys Effectiveness System training module. Once you have completed this module, you will have completed orientation for the Teacher Keys Effectiveness System. TKES is the method used to evaluate teachers, paraprofessionals, counselors, principals, assistant principals, district office staff, and all other employees in the Jefferson County school system. These observations may take the form of TAPS, which are Teacher Assessment of Performance Standards, otherwise known as observations, or contributing professionals, those who are evaluated by other means. As a teacher, you will be evaluated using the TAPS method, the Teacher Assessment of Performance Standards. That means that you will have observations done in your classroom by an administrator. The primary purpose of the Teacher Keys Effectiveness System overall is to optimize student learning and growth, improve the quality of classroom instruction, and support the continuous growth of teachers. This is your observation. The TKES formative assessment has several parts to it. The formative assessment is the overall process of the TKES evaluation. First, there's a pre-conference that's conducted by your administrator. This pre-conference can either be individual by yourself or it can be done with a team of teachers. Next is the formative observations, or the classroom observations as they're commonly known. These observations may take anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes or possibly even an hour. There are 4 walkthroughs during the course of a year. Those walkthroughs can last anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. There's documentation that you may upload to support evidence of your standards or meeting the standards, or evidence that your administrators may ask for you to upload. If administrators ask you to upload that documentation, then you are required to upload the documentation. But you are able to upload any documentation that you would like as well. And finally, there's an end of the year conference. That end of the year conference is conducted individually with each teacher by one of your administrators. When I say that this is your observation, I say so because you have a say in how the observations are conducted. For instance, you'll notice that under the formative assessment manner of observation that there is a pre-conference. There are 2 formative observations, which are usually an hour-long minimum. There are 4 walkthroughs, which can be anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. A mid-year conference, documentation that may be required or requested, and end-of-year conference that is conducted by your administrator. What separates the TKES evaluation from all other forms of observations is the fact that it's based on the totality of evidence and the consistency of practice. That simply means that it's not based on an average of your observations. It's based on your growth as a teacher. If you start off with lower scores on your observations, but you end the year with higher scores, then the totality of evidence and consistency of practice shows that you have mastered those standards over time. Think of it this way. An attorney who has to take the bar 5 times before they pass it is still called an attorney after passing it the 5th time. So you are not penalized necessarily for those early lower scores. If you show the growth at the end, then that is accounted for much more heavily. That totality of evidence and consistency of practice is determined several ways. One, through the formative observations, those longer classroom observations. There's also the documentation that you are required to supply or that you supply on your own regard. And then those short walkthroughs that administrators do. But keep in mind, along with this totality of evidence and consistency of practice are the day-to-day operations that administrators might observe. So if they walk by your classroom or step into the classroom or see you doing things in the hallway or whatever the case may be, those can also be used for your evaluation to help you or to hurt you. But all of those things together make up your formative assessment. As stated, your pre-evaluation conference can be held in groups or individually. You're going to be asked to come up with 2 or 3 goals that you want to accomplish throughout the year. One of those goals will probably be an individual goal, but then the others will probably be either team goals or school goals. What your principals will talk to you about is what the needs are of the school based on data from the previous year or data that has been shown from your own TKES evaluations from the previous year, unless you're a new teacher. Your goal should address those needs, and then that principal or administrator who's doing your orientation will address the goals and expectations of TKES overall for you specifically. These conferences are held prior to the start of any observations, so you cannot be officially observed until your pre-evaluation conference is held. That conference will be recorded in the TLE platform, and you will be requested to sign off on that to complete the process. After you sign off on that, then the principals are able to begin the observation process. There are three parts to the Teacher Keys effectiveness system overall. First is the teacher assessment on performance standards, those classroom observations. That piece of the observation counts 50%. Then there's the professional growth piece. That piece counts 20%, and that professional growth is tied to your goals. And then there's the student growth piece. How do students perform? How do they grow based on your instruction? There are two different methods of getting the student growth information. One is for teachers who teach classes where there's an end of course test or an end of grade test. If you teach an end of course test or an end of grade test, then your student growth measure will be determined by the milestones assessment. If you do not, then your student growth measure will be determined by a pre-test, post-test that will be described to you by your school administrators. The first piece of the evaluation that we're going to talk about is the teacher assessment on performance standards or the classroom observation. That's the piece that weighs the most. That piece is worth 50% of your observation. When administrators come in to observe you, they're going to observe you based on the 5 domains and 10 performance standards of the TKES evaluation. The 5 domains are planning, instructional delivery, assessment of and for learning, learning environment, and professionalism and communication. The 10 performance standards are professional knowledge and instructional planning under the planning domain, instructional strategies and differentiated instruction under the instructional delivery domain, assessment strategies and assessment uses under the assessment of and for learning domain, positive learning environment and academically challenging environment under the learning environment domain, and finally, professionalism and communication under the professionalism and communication domain. When your administrators come in to observe you, they'll use a rubric tied to the TKES standards. The rubric will look something like this. At the very top will be the domain. In this case, it's instructional delivery. Next, in the orange section, is the performance standard. And here you'll see performance standard 3, instructional strategies, with a brief description of what that instructional strategy is. Very important to you and to the administrator is that next section, where it says performance indicators. These are sample activities that an administrator might see when they come in that would fit this standard. Now, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but these are just suggestions of things that the administrator might see that might fulfill that standard. And lastly, at the bottom is the performance appraisal rubric. It's in 4 levels, and this is where the administrator will score you based on what they observe in your classroom. When using the rubric to evaluate you, your administrator is going to start at level 3, which is the expected level of performance. They're going to read the descriptor under level 3 and read that to exclusion. And what that simply means is they're going to read that until they see something that either is not being met, or if everything is being met under level 3, they'll move over to level 4. So if you'll notice in each one of the levels, there's an underlined word or phrase. On level 3, that underlined word is consistently. That means that more often than not, probably 8 out of 10 times that they come into your classroom, the administrators will see you performing the tasks that are associated with that rubric. Now, you will get a copy of this rubric so that you are able to know exactly what it is that you're expected to do. However, pay very close attention to the terms that are under each one of the levels. Whereas level 3 means consistently, you'll notice that level 2 says inconsistently. That means it's hit or miss. They may or may not see that standard in place when they come into your classroom. The goal, of course, is to be consistent or be continual. But if you are inconsistent, then that means you will be scored at a level 2. Now, That is not a bad thing. Most teachers are going to score somewhere between level 2 and level 3. It is very hard to get a level 4 and almost equally as hard to get a level 1. The reason I say that it's hard to get a level 1 is because according to the rubric, it says the teacher does not use research-based instructional strategies, etc., etc. Does not use means they don't see it at all, not in observation, not in documentation, not in any type of observation informally throughout the school during the course of the year. That's very hard to do. That means you're just not doing it. There's a very good chance that if you're not doing something or you're completely not doing something, that you're going to have a conference even before the observation starts. And that's why I say a level 1 is very hard to get. Equally as hard to obtain is a level 4 rating. The reason the level 4 rating is hard to attain is if you'll read the rubric's descriptors, you'll see first the word continually. Continually means always, without fail. That means whenever an administrator comes in to observe you, they're going to see the descriptors associated with this standard in place and in action. But notice towards the end of the descriptor for level 4 as well. It says teachers rated at level 4 continually seek ways to serve as role models or teacher leaders. That means you might have an observation classroom, or you might lead professional learning, or you might have presented at a conference. Everybody doesn't have that opportunity. Everybody doesn't take those opportunities. So if you haven't done those things that identify yourself as a teacher leader or as one who's willing to work with others and lead others in developing content knowledge or instructional skills, then a level 4 is going to be very hard to attain. While the observation piece accounts for 50% of your observation, the professional growth piece accounts for 20% of your observation. The professional growth piece is tied directly to your goals. So basically, the 20% tied to the professional growth is measured by the progress you have towards your professional growth goals. These are the goals that are determined by your self-assessment, your pre-evaluation, your mid-year, and your other conferences. These goals may or may not be reflective of those goals, though. It may be something that your administrators have said they want to see you work on. The simplest way to make sure you get this 20% of your observation is to participate in professional learning. And participation doesn't just mean you show up, it means you're engaged. So whenever there's professional learning for the school, for your team, for your department, for your content, participate in it. And don't just participate, engage. If you participate and engage in professional learning, then that 20% for professional growth should be a pretty easy goal for you to obtain. The final piece of the observation is the student growth piece. That's worth 30%. Remember, there are two ways to determine this. One is for teachers who have end of course or end of grades tests associated with those courses. The second one are those teachers who do not give end of course or end of grades assessments and therefore have to use a pre-test post-test method. Unfortunately, with the onset of the pandemic a couple of years ago, we have not had the student growth piece attached to the TKES evaluation and don't foresee it being used this year. Therefore, I am not going to go into depth about the discussion of this. However, please be aware, those of you that have the end of course test or end of grade test attached to your courses, those assessment scores still go to the superintendent and are still seen by school level administrators and can be used in your evaluations. Therefore, you want to do as well as you possibly can with instruction and get your milestone scores as high as you possibly can. Likewise, those of you that would be evaluated using a pre-test post-test have the same issues. Those pre-test post-test scores will also go to the superintendent and to your school level administrators. So you want to do the best job instructionally that you possibly can. All of the information concerning the evaluation is housed on the longitudinal data system platform. When you go to that platform, you'll see a TKES and Leaks tab at the top, and when you click on it, you'll see folders that look like this. By watching this video, you are fulfilling the Orientation and Familiarization tab. However, under that tab, there are other documents that go deeper into explanation should you so desire. When you click on those folders, you see how those folders expand, and they provide you access to various steps that you'll be complete. One of the first steps you'll be required to complete before you have your pre-conference is the self-assessment. You'll go in, and using the same rubric that your principals do, you will complete a self-assessment on your own performance, on your own skills, on your own achievements. Be honest with yourselves. Remember, the whole purpose of the TKES evaluation is for growth. We're not expecting you to be a level 3 and 4 at everything. So be honest with yourselves and be honest with your administrators. That way, during your pre-conference, you can set some very realistic goals for yourself. The roster verification simply means it's important that you have the right kids tied to your name in the platform. Make sure that your classes are accurate. That's so that when the milestone scores come back, or when those pre-test, post-test scores come back, the right kids are tied to the right teacher. And finally, it's important that our students come to school. In order for their scores to be tied to a teacher, students have to be in that class for 90% of the time. Likewise, it's important for teachers to come to school. So in order for your student growth scores to count or to be recorded, you have to be at school 90% of the time. Falling short of that 90% is unacceptable. So barring urgent medical conditions, you need to be in school. Likewise, so do your students. So please, teachers, come to school, and please create an environment where your students are encouraged to come to school as well. This concludes the orientation for the TKES evaluation. Should you have further questions, please do not hesitate to contact one of your administrators and talk to them. If there's anything that I can do to support you in these efforts, please go through your administrator first, and your administrator will put you in touch with me. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for viewing this video, and have a great school year.